Hello everyone, and welcome to day 3 of Peer-to-Peer and to panel 5, Climate, the Defining Emergency of Our Times. I'm Lindsay Taylor, Curator of the University of Salford Art Collection, one of the organisers of Peer-to-Peer and host for this session, with just a few housekeeping rules to share with you. Firstly, this session is being recorded and will be added to the Peer-to-Peer website at a later date. Secondly, it is also being simultaneously interpreted into Cantonese. Should you wish to listen to this, please use the select language function at the bottom of your screen. Finally, we actively encourage questions and comments from the audience. You can submit these through the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be monitoring these, and we hope to have time to put some of these questions to the panel towards the end of the session. I'm now delighted to hand over to Sarah Fisher, Director of Open Eye Gallery and Chair of this session.
Welcome everybody. It gives me so much pleasure to actually be chairing this session. I'm going to start by just, before I introduce the panel, I'm going to start by just kind of laying some of the things that we might think about, both from the climate end and from the arts end. Now, I'm not a climate specialist, so I've drawn on the thinking of Johan Rockström, who's done a lot of work on tipping points. And he sort of concisely explains that 9 of the 15 biophysical systems that regulate the climate, things like the Siberian permafrost, the rainforest, the ice caps, are at risk of reaching tipping point. So we have approximately 10 years to avoid this and to move towards sustainability. And he kind of lists what sustainability means. So it's decarbonising energy, industry, transport, buildings. It's turning agriculture from a source of emission to a store of carbon. And I think, probably most interestingly for me, it's about supporting a new logic model for our society. And that logic model being based on well-being, the idea of well-being. So the art world, I know that a little bit more. It's evolving. I think one of the things I'd say about the art world is we're paying much closer attention to innovative models that are based on values and well-being. Interestingly, Yang Jung yesterday, she sort of sheepishly confessed to being self-consciously value-driven, which made me smile because I think I recognize this, the kind of dis-ease with being value-driven or talking about your values. And it is sort of slightly prevalent in the arts. And I think in one way, it's because the art world has privileged a particular kind of artist, an artist that's sort of an outsider, and they're reflecting back to us and challenging our way of thinking. And this role is in no way one that I want to dismiss in any way, but I find myself looking at artists like Jan Preston, she's interrogating rewilding, and she's doing this through a sort of very personal lens. She's reflecting as an immigrant to the UK on the idea of wild species, what wild species are. She's looking at things like rhododendrons, and she's saying, are these benign or are these evasive species? How do we see them? I've got a bit of a confession to make of myself, I think. I think I'm a kind of active optimist. So I tend to kind of look at problems and think about, first and foremost, think about solutions. And I think perhaps maybe it's my time, because going back to the art world and the way that the art world's operating, I think there's a sort of rebalancing happening. It's in no way dismissing that earlier version of artist, but it's also really looking at artists, and there's much more conversation about artists that engage with people. And they engage with people to co-create, and that could be co-creating arenas for reimagining, or it could be co-curating things which are kind of related to doing in some way, active. So I think, we can look at sort of, perhaps most famous is Tanya Bruguera and the art of social change. But recently I've been looking at artists like Something and Son. I don't know if you know them, but they did an amazing piece at Folkestone Triennial a few years ago. And they were actually working with sixth form students to create a kind of zero carbon environment, which was made out of a polytunnel, and to kind of start reimagining food production and how that might operate. And actually one of those artists, Andrew Merritt, we're currently working with partners in Liverpool, and he's building a sculpture trail. He's looking at recycled materials, but to build the sculptures are actually either habitats or drinking spaces or whatever. He's kind of looking at biodiversity and how they can positively add to this green corridor. I kind of think of him as an active optimist, if I'm honest. And yesterday we heard from Maddie Nicholson with her fantastic work with Art Gene, and she kind of presented the work. She talked about Art Gene looks at the social, natural and built environments in Barrow. But she was at real pains to say that they start with the social, they start with people, they start with communities. And I was thinking about this last night, and I was thinking, what does it mean to start with people? And I suppose in a way it means if you start with people, you're listening to them, and those people change your way of thinking. And I was thinking about the MP David Lammy. I mean, he recently did a great speech, which was really asking, well, demanding that we have more black voices in the climate debate. Because, you know, as he said, we know that the majority of carbon emissions come from our cities, and that the people in the poorest communities in our cities breathe the most polluted air. They have least access to green spaces. We also know that if we continue dumping carbon at this rate, there's that whole band across the middle of the world with 2 billion people living in it, and that those spaces will become uninhabitable. Now, most of those people are not white. So if we start with people, we see things differently. Helen Viviora was really interesting also yesterday. She was talking about listening to young voices. And she was saying it was this that sort of made her realise that although the gallery's working really hard to reduce its own carbon emissions, this wasn't enough. She needed to integrate the climate agenda into her programme. So I want to come back again to this idea of this new logic model that's based on well-being. There are many artists that are looking at this. We're going to hear from Natalie later, who's kind of involved with slow living. And there's also a lot of artists that are kind of working with people to reconnect them to nature. And just to mention another one of my favourite artists at the moment, she's an artist called Fiona MacDonald, and she's developed this great series of talks, which is called Ask the Wild, in which she puts people that come from biodiversity and from various experts, if you like, on a panel. And she asks the audience to ask questions about human problems to the panelists. And the panelists then look at biodiversity, they look at the natural world, and they look at the models there, and they apply them to the problems, the very human problems that are being asked of them. So many artists are starting with people. And in all of the examples that I've given, when I say people, I mean they're collaborating with communities, but also communities of interest, with the people and agencies that are engaged with advocating for or implementing change to avert climate catastrophe. Which brings me actually to my panel, which is a nice mix of both of those two things. And panelists, I'm going to introduce you. If you could raise your hands when I talk about you so that everybody knows who you are. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. Richard Fitton. He's an expert in energy efficiency of international standing, and he's instrumental in the University of Salford's work around Energy House. So they're researching energy usage. And Patrick Fung. Patrick is Chief Executive of the Clean Air Network, an independent NGO based in Hong Kong, which works via a kind of collaborative ethos to advocate for and develop public engagement towards safe air standards. And then we have Colette Bailey. She's Artistic Director and Chief Executive of Metal, an arts organisation operating actually over 3 sites in the UK, across the UK. And the organisation is kind of renowned for its support for artists and their ability to catalyse the potential of people and places. And then we have Natalie Lai, who's in really inspiring work as half farmer and half artist, based in Hong Kong. And I think in many ways she embodies that lifestyle that we're talking about, which is based on well-being. Richard, I'm going to start with you, and I wondered if you could just quickly introduce the work of Energy House.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for inviting me to speak. It's a very interesting session. This got a lot of different people and different views. So I'm a physicist, so I come from this purely kind of science point of view. So my role here is I run several test facilities. The main one is called Energy House. So what we do here is we have a typical UK building sat within a very large environmental chamber, and we can do things like change the temperature and make snow and wind and rain and things like that in the chamber. So that allows us to study the effects that different measures have on a building. So what effects insulation would make, or changing the heating system, or changing the glazing, things like this. So in terms of climate change and our response to climate change, it's very important that we treat our existing building stock, our old building stock, with a great amount of care and attention. We don't destroy it, but we also have to make it more efficient than what it is. Otherwise, we're never going to make any significant gains on our CO2 and our climate change problems that we've got in the UK. And it's global as well. You know, we do a lot of global research. We're just about to build a new facility which looks at the global impact of buildings from all around the world. So yeah, that's what I do. I look at how we can improve buildings and hopefully improve the energy efficiency, and thus help mitigate some of the climate change problems that we have around the housing that we all live in.
Now, Richard, I'm going to kick off with the first question before I invite the panelists in, because when I was talking to you previously, I was really fascinated by the kind of issue that many people feel, which is that looking at how we might reduce our energy use, we kind of see it as a very expensive thing, because people think about, I don't know, solar panels or ground source heat pumps, or things which are often too expensive for many people to engage with. So I wondered whether you've got any tips or advice for people that don't have that kind of funding.
Yeah, so one of my areas of research is kind of cost neutral energy efficiency measures, something we can use differently we've already got in home, or something that's very cost effective. So we all know that if we insulate our homes and change our heating systems to something more efficient, we'll make some big savings. You can make savings of 70% if you spend £15,000 on a typical UK property. But my area of research a couple of years ago was looking at things like curtains and carpets and things like this, and rugs, and how we can use everyday things that we generally already have, blinds, for instance, as well, to save energy. So if you use your curtains and blinds efficiently, so you have them on usually in the evening when our heating's on, coincides with the nighttime, we can save 3 or 4% of energy in our building. We can also feel warmer. There's obviously the privacy element, which is why curtains were invented, and the thermal comfort, so we can feel warmer, we can save energy, and we hopefully save carbon as well. The same with carpets, a good quality carpet, which we all should have. We can save 3 or 4%. Again, the same type of thing. So we all know the light fittings and changing the controls and all this, which I think everyone is well aware. If we switch the lights off, we make savings. But the things that are generally present in our home can also help us save energy as well. So, and it's not something that's very well publicized. It doesn't fit into any of the modeling that we do for regulatory purposes. No one covers carpets and curtains, and yet they're something that we regularly engage with. And if we engage with them slightly different, we can save a little bit more money. And there's clearly hundreds more things you can do, but that's one of the areas of research that I've been active in on the side. So yeah,
I'm going to tell everybody about the curtains thing. Close your curtains at night. You could end up saving 3 or 4% of your energy bill. I mean, that is amazing, absolutely amazing. Could I open it up to the panel now, and whether any of the panel might have some questions for Richard?
Well, I don't have a question, but I am feeling guilty about my floorboards now, because it's the first time I've ever heard that issue of carpets brought up in this sort of discussion. And it's so obvious, I guess, when it's pointed out, but yeah. So when you were talking about the sort of physical infrastructure as opposed to behaviours, it's one of the things that I've come to realise over the years we've been working with climate, with artists, that actually it's the behaviours that are hardest to change, actually, but also more important. And I think the interesting thing about the behaviours thing is that everybody's in control of their own. So this feeling of being overwhelmed, you know, by the sort of enormity of the issue, it gives you some ownership over, you know, the things that you actually can do. So yeah, I think
it's interesting that there's I fit energy savings into two categories. So there's passive, and there's things that just happen, and there's things that you need to do something with. And let's face it, if you put a building in a field and left it, it doesn't use any energy whatsoever. It's got embodied carbon in it for the bricks and things like this, but it doesn't use any energy. When we put people in it, that's when the problems start to occur. That's when the energy gets used. So the energy savings measures kind of fit into these two things. So if you look at energy savings measures like insulation that we put in our roofs or our walls or our floors, the carpets are a good example of that. They carry on saving energy as long as we have the heating on, and they'll save energy for hundreds of years if the insulation lasts that long. And then we do things like heating controls and lighting controls and things like this, which we need people to physically intervene and turn our thermostats down. In essence, that's what we need to do. And the same goes for heating as it does for cooling, where it doesn't matter where you are in the globe, these things still affect us. So that's when behavior really becomes interesting, and it's the missing piece. You know, we can make all the interventions we like to buildings, but we do need the occupants. And it goes for any type of building to have some effect on what we do in the buildings as well. So yeah, great systems will only be great if great people are using them. So, you know, and that can change, and it can change over time as well. And everyone is individual. You know, everyone will have a different tolerance and threshold to what comfortable is, for instance. So yeah, I think that if we have a mixture of passive, you know, so we put the insulation on and we educate, then I think that is our best way forward. Thanks, Colette. And your floorboards are okay.
Patrick.
Hi. Well, thanks for the sharing. I think the little hack, you know, in life that could save our electricity bill. And that is one of the key strong incentive for people. I'm just wondering if there's any you know, modern technology you would also advise, say a energy meter. We have some startup in Hong Kong that do energy meters. So I think what we are talking about now is really about people. So we always understand that people could be the problem as well as the solution. So as a different advancement on technology, and do you think there's something that we could do more in scale, so that is more than 3 to 4% improvement? Yeah,
so I know little bits about Hong Kong's metering infrastructure, but not a great deal. But I know that you engage with smart metering and automatic meter readings and things like that. So, and it's the same in the UK. So visibility of energy is really important. The drivers which make people stop using energy are different. So some people that are more green orientated might be thinking about carbon. Some people who are low income might be thinking far more about cost. And some people might be thinking in terms of energy, you know, actual kilowatts, you know, because they're physically minded. I think that the main thing is that everyone will react in different ways, but everyone gains from having visibility of energy. Many people would disengage from it and put we have in the UK, and I think Hong Kong is very similar. We have devices which we can view our energy usage in real time. They're given out free when we install electric and gas meters. Maybe 1 out of 3 people use them. 2 out of 3 put them in the kitchen drawer and close them and just leave them there. So it's about how we can switch people on to thinking about reducing energy. And there is no one size fits all, unfortunately. You know, Patrick, you might be interested in something about energy that's different than me. You know, and I know it's the same for air quality. You know, some people are interested in health. Some people are interested in all the other different aspects of air quality around and the causes of it. You know, the pollutants are generated by vehicles that shouldn't be on the roads anymore and things like that. Everyone has got a different angle in all this, and it's very difficult to educate people when it's so broad, isn't it? So.
I'm wondering if you bring Natalie in now, because Natalie, you're very much thinking about lifestyle in your own practice and in your lifestyle. And I think I was interested in asking whether you recognise what Rich is talking about, that kind of people-centred way of communicating, I suppose, as an artist.
But besides addressing this question, I had questions to Richard.
Yes, sure.
About that, because I had a recent concern about the solar panels, because in Hong Kong we have a rural area, so that's it's pretty large, relatively large than in the city. So many of the villages, they place the solar panel on the rooftop. So it's a common practice in Hong Kong now in new territory. It's growing numbers. But we also worry that for the solar panel, although it transforms the solar energy to electricity. So, but we worry about how about after 10 years or 20 years, will it be, may have a new generation of solar panels. How could we deal with that, the old models? Yeah. So my very recent concern about that.
And it's a good question. So the standard lifespan, expected lifespan of a PV cell would be about 25 years. So they're often guaranteed for 25 years, but the performance does reduce over a number of years, and they will still be okay after the end of 25 years, but the performance would have reduced. I think a lot of people are concerned with PV in as much as we can have an inefficient house. Something that's very leaky, very difficult to heat, poor quality lighting and things like this. And it doesn't solve any problems by putting the PV on the roof. Okay, we sometimes need to make the building better, and that should really be the last thing that we do. So in the UK, we went through this whole saga maybe eight or 9 years ago of offering people lots of money, 43 pence per kilowatt, to put a cell on their roof, and as it generated, you get paid. Okay, so there's this whole thing of putting PV so it looked efficient and it looked nice and energy friendly, but it was just a financial thing, and it wasn't saving any energy really. The energy from a typical house in a heated environment, about 63% of it is from heating and hot water, not really TVs and appliances and fridge freezers and things like this. So it was called, we called it greenwash. We washed over the UK with this greenwash to make it look like we were doing lots, but it was a financial speculation for many people in a home that wasn't very energy efficient. So that is another problem that we have. And corporations have the same problem. We look green from the outside, but is it really all it seems? Possibly not.
Yeah, that's the case.
So I'm going to move the conversation a bit now to the art side. I hope that everybody's had something to think about. They've listening to Richard and listening to people, really, that they're starting to think about this agenda. And now I'm going to flip over to the art side and ask Colette to introduce her practice, to introduce the work of metal culture. Colette.
Thanks, Sarah, and hi everyone. So as Sarah says, I'm the artistic director of Metal, which operates from 3 sites: Southend-on-Sea in Essex, Liverpool and Peterborough. And the model of the way that we work has at its heart artists. We work with artists from all different disciplines, both locally and from around the world. We invite those artists into residence, providing them with time and space to develop their practice and the philosophies around their work, but without necessarily the obligation to produce product out of that. So it's purely R&D. What we do ask is that those artists take an interest and pay attention to the places where we are, in the belief that artists can bring fresh ideas and thinking to those places. And so we are in the places where we are very deliberately, all of those places have identified culture as a driver for change in one or another ways. And then around all of that, we work really hard to make sure that as many people of all ages and all walks of life participate in the work that we do, and not just as audiences for whatever finished work we might want to present, but at the point where works are being created and conceived. So Sarah mentioned this in her introduction about co-creation, and artists who are really interested in working with all kinds of people, you know, communities, people with expertise to offer, and people of all sorts and all ages, young people in there as well as an important aspect. So as an organisation, I guess we've been working with the idea and responding to the climate emergency, I guess, for the last 12 years in an increasingly deep and urgent way as the sort of emergency becomes much more clear. And Richard, I think we were probably guilty of being involved in what you just called greenwashing, because actually when we first became interested, it was to do with the building that we were occupying in Southend, which was derelict when we took it on, and we had the opportunity to renovate it. And of course, we took that opportunity, you know, thinking about what was most important to us in terms of the conversations that we might have with people and artists in there, and climate was at the top of that list. And so we did take that opportunity to install turbines and photovoltaics and solar tubes and all of the things that you mentioned. But of course, it was a grade 2 listed building as well. So in terms of inefficient houses, completely inefficient. And I completely concur with what you say, and it's what we've learned actually over those the 12 years that we've been in there. However, I still think that decision was a good decision to make, because the turbines on the roof of a grade 2 listed house actually sent out a really powerful symbol, and it was part of the reason why we really wanted to do it, because it sort of signified that this derelict house that had been sat there for 40 years was back in business and really wanted to get serious about talking about some of the issues of the day. And so alongside its Georgian chimneys, it now has a sort of version of a 21st century chimney, which are these 2 turbines on the roof. And so whilst it hasn't necessarily been that effective in reducing the carbon emissions of the house, it's been really effective in flagging up the issue as conversation. And so from that house, over the years, we've developed all kinds of programs and artworks that have this conversation at the heart. And sometimes that's commissioned artworks. Other times it's about projects that we put together with our neighbours and nearby residents. So one of my favourites was, we run a big music and arts festival each year called Village Green, deliberately called Village Green actually because of the green in the title, but also that's where people gather to show their wares, you know, in our case, cultural wares. And so in the week before that festival, we put together what we called the Big Charge, which was essentially a set of 10 bikes linked to a generator and battery that was powered by about 2,000 people over the week leading up to the festival, and then used to charge one of the stages. So linking all the time audiences to the idea of you know, where the energy comes from, and also sort of participating in a really sort of specific and deliberate way, I guess. And then one of the things that we're working on currently is a big large-scale festival called Estuary 2021, which will be presented in the spring next year. And the Thames Estuary is the main theme and what the artists are responding to, but looking through 3 lenses that we've chosen, which we believe are you know, contemporary concerns that we think about a lot, one of which is climate. The others are protest and rebellion, which obviously is linked very much to that climate theme too. And the third is imperial legacy, which arguably is also very strongly linked through the history of the Thames. And so artists are responding in quite site-specific, developmental ways, working with people who live alongside the river, and crucially, I think, being brought into conversation with the agencies that understand what those environmental concerns are. They have the data and they have the expertise, and so we run these lab programs which brings artists into contact with that expertise. And increasingly, actually, those agencies like the Environment Agency or Thames Estuary Partnership, we're also working with Essex Wildlife Trust and others, they are looking for ways in which their knowledge and messages can go out into the world with a sort of emotive, you know, so in a way that tells stories, that enables people to connect with, you know, that hard data in an emotional way, and all in the hope that it may make people take notice and change behaviours as a result.
Brilliant, thank you so much for Colette. And it is really a really inspiring model. Having been to a few metal events, I think that kind of the engagement, the public engagement, it can be completely amazing in some instances. And I was just wondering, Colette, what your view is on artists' role in supporting the sort of well-being logic model, the idea that society might actually reframe a little bit away from that sort of economic model, that drive to buy more and more stuff, and that move towards that sort of model which is about well-being.
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, artists have to respond to the things that interest them, I think, because that's where the truth in their work comes out. But I also think it's true that, you know, there are many artists who are working with those themes already. You know, things like self-care as a radical act. We ourselves run a really successful wellbeing program that's been going for about 4 years now, working with people living with mental health. Yeah, I think sometimes it's problematic to talk about the artist's role, because, you know, in the arts we're often being used for social purpose, and actually, you know, one of the things that you know, metal, we've been really careful to keep sacred, I guess, is the idea that actually, in order for artists to be effective in the world in whatever way they would like to be effective, you have to nurture and support and give them time to develop. So yes, I'm always quite cautious about the sort of, you know, the functionality that's sort of suggested in some of the language that we use around these things. However, that said, absolutely, artists who choose to work in that way, yeah, are invaluable. And also the idea that people need to be reminded that their access to their own imagination and their own creativity is allowed. And I think, particularly in the UK, we're not particularly good at that in terms of the rhetoric that we use to talk about the arts in society. And you see it in young people, very young children, in abundance, and then somehow it's sort of removed as having permission to do that as we grow older. And so yeah, there is, of course, a major part that access to arts and creativity and great creative thinking plays in helping to open that up again for people.
It was a very interesting way you're talking about that, you know, being comfortable with the idea of the idea of an artist having a role as such, because it has some kind of end purpose, which is not connected to being an artist for, in some sort of circumstances. And I think it's again a very, very pertinent debate, and a really interesting what people are sort of saying about that, because there's a kind of idea of artists being used too, and then there's the artists themselves that are talking about, you know, being useful, and actually that being part of their practice, and seeing that very much as their role, as in as integral to how they operate in the world. So there's that sort of conversation, which I think, you know, on one side could be actually about co-opting artists. And on the other side, it's about listening to them, isn't it? But it's also about the artists that you choose, because all organizations choose artists to work with. And I think sometimes we kind of pretend that we don't do that. We do. We do. We choose artists and we ask them to come. We select artists for residency, and we always have a reason for doing that. And we kind of pretend we don't, as if somehow or other this creativity comes out of the woodwork and bites us. And those are the artists that end up working with. We choose them. And so we are actually supporting one type of practice or another type of practice. And I think sometimes it can get very complicated. Natalie, I wondered if you wanted to come in at all on this one. Oh, I think you're on mute, darling.
Hello. Yes. And you asking me about the turning of the choice of the artist's role, isn't it? About addressing this. Actually, it's my. I can relate to my sharing of the half farming, half eggs, because somehow I thought it might be a compromising what practical is to me personally, because as you have said that art might not be the solution, as always asking questions, and we are not saying something propaganda or make it as a statement. It's quite boring to do so. But however, sometimes we artists question it and criticize ourselves, or why we are not that useful. Yeah, so being farmer somehow might be a good way for me to make it. It's valuable. Yeah, but I could say it may not be a best solution, because sometimes it is not professional if I split myself into two. Yeah, but that's I'm trying to see. Yeah.
But I think that idea that you're experimenting with your lifestyle, you know, that you're experimenting as a person, which I think, you know, again, really, really interesting. I wondered if Patrick or Richard, we might have to be quick because we're actually running out of time. Do you have a question at all, or?
Not at all, but I do completely feel that there's a tension on, whether the economic logic model and the well-being logic model could coexist. As Natalie pointed out, maybe we are all measured by the output that we're producing, and it is not that beneficial to human, as shown in the past decade, and that's why we're talking about climate change problems. And another way to really look at it is that I think for some time that as a campaigner point of view, we also sort of to choose how to work with different collaborators, including artists, and then there's no really good way or criteria to really judge that, and we somehow would sort of lost in translation. And when we are trying to work with artists, sometimes we're asked the question how impactful it is, and then we're not able to measure the output outcome impact of the work we produce with them. But somehow we do see that it is a sparkling the discussion, a imaginative a perspective, etc. So this is some kind of thing that I think, as a campaign point of view, we are still struggling to see how to measure the social impact.
I think that's the case also in the UK, but there's some very interesting research on social impact, and a number of arts organisations in the UK have developed routes to look at social impact because it is important to them and important to their organisation. I'm going to just change pace a little bit, and I'm going to ask you all to give your provocations to everybody, to the audience, your provocations for the audience, I suppose. Patrick, do you want to kick off?
Absolutely. So I think well, we have talked about a few things already, and well, for me, if I'm from a, I'm not a art practitioner. We worked with art group, obviously, and then back to my previous point, it's always for us to how to measure the influence of different project campaigns. And one of the things that I really love to spark discussion is on the diminishing influence. Say we saw that there's fascinating festival, and then it's more about a physical person-to-person interaction. But in times of the COVID, the festival, or with respect to all the social distancing policy, it might not be that possible to have art festival that frequent. And on the other hand, we know that there's a overwhelming influence of tech industry, including all types of social media. So if I'm from looking at whether and which approach to get the minds or hearts of the people more usefully is totally from a useful point of view, then I would start to question, would there still be a strong role for the creative, cultural, art sector to play to respond to climate change issue? Why not I work with Facebook, Google, Twitter to facilitate the changes?
Yep, no, that's great. And Patrick, you had a second one?
The second one is about the survival. Though situation in Hong Kong is that I think all over the world, I think the cultural, creative, artists sector has suffered a lot during the COVID time. And when we talk about bigger values like climate change, can the sector actually attract more talent from the young generation? Is it able to make a living here before we talk about fostering further changes? So this is a survival question. And the third one, if I may, is that about China. So we heard that there is a new announcement from China to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, which could be a game changer. However, among many Chinese-speaking community, including the diaspora Chinese around the world, Hong Kong people, Taiwan people, Chinese people, Tibet people, we are not sharing the same vision all the time and the values. And so is it possible? And if so, how could the Chinese speaking creative cultural artists community be working together to strengthen influence on climate change issue? So these are my little provocations to the panel and the audience.
Natalie?
Yes. Do you like me to respond to that, or?
No, I'd like you to give your provocations.
Provocation, okay.
Please, yeah.
So I would like to give two, and because my team, we are working collectives, but we are in small group, because in like permaculture, we believe in small scale, but somehow it is a very slow practice. Although we believe in the bottom-up approach because we believe individuals could have their own creativity. But I wonder if any of your case, do we really encourage bottom-up approach of the solutions, especially we are facing the environmental crisis, because it might be too slow for that, but it will have a significant change on the solutions. So that's my first one. And the second one might be related to the previous sharing, because, for example, the exhibition, the promotion events, or marketing campaign, no matter in the art sector, cultural sector, or the environmental sector, so they are not really environmental friendly at all when we are doing the campaign. So do we have awareness on to eliminate the waste of resources and how we could prevent the further damages to the planet? Yeah, that's my second one.
No, brilliant. Both really, really pertinent questions. And Richard?
Right, mine are, as you might expect, slightly more practical provocations. I've done several research projects within art galleries and cultural installations, shall we say, that mix various different types of arts and gathering of people. the arts are under a burden which is quite tricky. So you're mandated in lots of places to be carbon friendly and you work towards being carbon neutral, but an art gallery should also be one of the most comfortable places that you can ever be in. You know, you need to stand and look and absorb things and see things that are meant to be seen. It's not something you can walk through quickly. So they should be very comfortable environments to be in. The work we've done has shown that they can be very, very uncomfortable places to be in, which as artists, you know, the people on this session, should cause you some concern. It means that people hurry through and don't look at what you're doing. But then I've spent the first 5 minutes of the session telling us all that we should be more energy efficient. So there is my provocation, how do we get them to be very comfortable places that people can hang around in and yet still turn down the thermostats? It's a very difficult thing to do. My next provocation, hopefully, we need to work towards climate change and educating people. And artists are an integral part of that. They form our opinions, whether it's through pictures or speeches or however we produce our art. If we had one chance to get in front of everyone, what would that piece of art be that demonstrated that we need to do something about the climate emergency? And I don't want to hear about polar bears on icebergs. So.
Well, that's a biggie. Patrick. Oh, sorry, Colette, sorry.
Okay, my two are not dissimilar to those that have already been put forward, really. So the first one is, are we practicing what we preach? Is it time to pay more attention to how we produce and operate in the arts, as well as what we're putting forward through content? And the second one is related to content. Now that we have your attention, what next? How do we follow through on the impact that an artwork may have? Or as Patrick said earlier, how do we even measure, actually, and particularly in the timeframes that we might need to measure it in, which is often quite immediate. You know, in the arts, we have to give our evaluations of things, you know, a month or two after they've happened, when actually impacts might not become clear until many years later.
No, again, brilliant questions, brilliant questions. Patrick, could I ask you now to introduce the Clean Air Network? And it's what we're going to have to speed up, I'm sorry, but we're sort of running low of time.
Yeah, sure. Clean Network is based in Hong Kong. We were founded 10 years ago. And then ultimately, we want to see clean air in Hong Kong. And we want to see strong policy vision and measures of Hong Kong that will catch up with regional counterpart and even set some of the best practice among global cities. We try to achieve this by converging cross-disciplinary experts, you know, public health, science, urban planning, public, as well as transport people. And we use a mix of approaches. So we have the advocacy, the community, we have analysis, we get stakeholders to work together. And we hope to foster a people climate that enhance the overall literacy on environmental health risk. And I think that is where we are now, and we strive to have stronger presence, you know, in terms of the COVID. We're talking about green recovery recently, and then with the GBA, we're talking about how to get the regional collaboration to clean up some of the pollutants.
Right. Okay. A massive ask, obviously, in terms of, and I'm really interested in your relationship to the public, to people. And I noticed within your program that you do particularly work with schools. And I was just wondering through that work whether you managed to bring parents in, whether you managed to engage with parents.
We hope to do that. We see school, not just school, but a pivotal area in the community. So it's very influential to, you know, start from school, but we try to have the influence beyond school. And youth is super important. When we talk about young creative, we want those young people with global horizon. They could have the social intelligence. They could have the strong hard skills and soft skills. And it will be a crucial asset to Hong Kong, and for us to do catch up, as mentioned, on you know, all the policy front. And then from school, youth, and then we come to the parents. we think parents have different couple hats. So on one time, they could be a father, mother, but the staff of a company, mentor of some interest group. We try to start from the kid to let them know that why they have to care about climate emergency or air pollution issue. And then parents would spread the awareness and influence among the network out. So this is how we see why we do education in school, but is basically a beyond school project.
Would anybody else like to ask Patrick a question? I mean,
may I ask you about, because I read about the Facebook of your NGO, that is, I find you have a very clever presentation of the dog researcher working with you, right? I mean, yeah, I think it's quite a clever way to arouse the people's interest. Mm-hmm. Can you share about it?
Yeah, I think that really we're trying to catch the general public mind. So we concern a lot on children. So preschool children, their height may be similar as a dog. So that's why we use a icon, a message to grow the awareness. It's also about how we see different lives. They're they're equal. We share the same air shed. And in the beginning of this discussion, we talk about biodiversity as well. It's not just people. And I think it's super important when we put in the context of climate change. And there's animal, people, as well as the plant, how we grow together as a bigger ecosystem. We have missed that as a human race for the past many years, but we have to catch up again.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Well, I think it is the time to bring in Natalie, who has amazing practice. Perhaps you could introduce the half-half model.
To make it short, so the lifestyle half farming, half eggs was advocated by the Japanese Naoki Shiomi, that he suggested because it is a world full of social problems. So it is hard for an individual to get a particular solution for individual. But how about we find an alternative way to explore and get energy from the soil? That's what half farming is. And for the half eggs represents the calling. So it's different from individual. It is the ability, maybe capacity that we are discovering. So we found that this is alternative lifestyle is quite amazing, because actually we are not really know what we are, who I am. So when we are going back to the nature, that is we confront with the difficulties in farming. So it is not on the previous case that we could have a very it's not the case that we take two sides, the stereotype, everything. So if we have grounded experience, we will know why people create problem, because we are individual. For example, the conventional farmer, they want to have a good production, to have lots of harvest. So that's why they are putting pesticides. But if we are not the farmers, we will only blaming them. Wow, you use the pesticides. We are not having the healthy food at all. So this is a very grounded experience that I think it may be a way for the artists or people from the cultural sector to know about the actual situation, what's going on in the planet, and what energy we could get from the soil. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was interested, Natalie, because obviously you're half farmer, half artist, and other people in the cooperative are half farmer, half something else.
Yeah, yes.
Then
maybe writer, yeah.
Yes, but collectively, when you're doing your farming, what happens to the produce that you make, that you grow?
You mean the seasonal vegetable?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We will have seasonal vegetable and also replanting rice. Like two times in Hong Kong we could have. So we also doing the community support agriculture, the CAS system, or you can say the concept is that people subscribe the weekly veggie package. So we try hard to make it a regular delivery to the families. So each family, they will have a bag of it. So we put like 3 to 4 kinds of vegetable, the seasonal one. So it is just like, but it is not really easy to do in Hong Kong because people need to use to making it free. And also it's like the farmers choose what kind of vegetable you would get. It's a different consuming habit. So people need to change. But this is really difficult, but we hope to try that. Yeah.
I think it's an amazing model. Has anybody got a question for Natalie?
Yes, I have a question, Sarah. Yeah, Natalie, it sounds really fascinating. I was just wondering, was it an active choice to become a farmer, or does your family have background in farming, or and if so, how long have you been doing it? Where are you in your journey in learning how to be a farmer?
Thank you for asking. Because of the time limit, I didn't really say so. Because it is after the social movements in Hong Kong 10 years ago, it is the anti-high-speed railway from the mainland China to Hong Kong West Kowloon district. And so it was the protest village social movement. But in the movements, my friend thought that it's just like looping of failure when we were just swaying slogan to the government, or we are protesting. Why don't we find a way to have an alternative living in Hong Kong? Because it is really important for you to grow your own food, because you know what you can get, but not the other people give you. So it is just like an exploration on what could we do? Could we be independent? It is not talking about the state, the independent of state, but for an individual, how could you change yourself? So that's why we started to learn farming 10 years ago. But yes, it's not really, because we were all beginners. So it took a lot of time to be so-called professional, and so.
I think for me, there's something really interesting here, which is, I mean, there's social movements, and social movements are changing the way we think about the world, undoubtedly, and they are people that are driving the social movements. And I think what's really interesting for me is that quite a number of those people are also artists. And if we can share those different ways in which artists are approaching these huge, absolutely huge topics, Black Lives Matter, climate change agenda, etc., and we can look at the ways in which artists are approaching them, I think perhaps we can move some way towards supporting that kind of new, particularly young artists, that sort of new generation of artists, and their very, very particular interests in terms of practice, but also perhaps engaging with people in different ways, all sorts of people in different ways, to kind of, and also obviously with you guys, with the experts in the field, so that we can collectively, I think there's something really sort of interesting happening here, something that could actually change things, and change the way we think about everything that we do, perhaps. Lindsay's just come on, which means that she's going to tell me to now close the session. I've got to say thank you so much, all of you. I feel like we just started and that we didn't even get to all of the questions and comments that came through on the chat. And it really feels like a kind of start of a conversation, and very, very different opinions within, even with the group. I think it's something that we need to keep talking about going forward. But thank you so much. And anybody that's interested in joining the next panel, it's about to start in 10 minutes.
It's about to start in 15 minutes, Sarah. So it's my role now to say thank you very much for chairing that. And it really was an incredible panel. And I'm sure there's lots more we could have talked about. So thank you all. Yes, the next panel, panel 6, Archiving Through Change, starts in 15 minutes time and is chaired by Paul Herman. So please do join us for that.